Hello, friends, and welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me again this week on the Embodied Healing Self. I am so honored that you are here with me again today. And I'm super excited to share two very special people who I happen to live near in the Jacksonville, Florida area, Dennis and Kathy Lang. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. So I want to start out by just sharing with everybody a little bit about the two of you. So I first met the two of you when I first moved here 11 years ago. And you may not remember this moment, but of course I certainly do. As a student in a community yoga class at the Cobalt Moon Center.
Mm-hmm.
And the first class that I attended actually was very special for me because I had just found out that I was pregnant with my second daughter. So I was very new to yoga. I attended your class. It was probably the second yoga class I had ever been to. I had tried one a couple years before. And something about that class just made me leaving the class knowing that yoga was going to be a part of my life. And today, I am also a teacher of yoga and meditation 11 years later. And still to this day, every time I have the privilege of being a student in your class, in a workshop or in a class, I have a profoundly transformational experience. And this is the truth coming from my heart. I texted you last week. I mean, it literally was just tears of gratitude while I was in your class. And it's been such an honor for me to witness the two of you through your journey over the last 11 years. Yeah, it really has. I believe at the time that maybe you were newly transitioning into your yoga career. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But what I want to share that is just such an honor for me right now is that I have had the privilege to not only be physically present in your classes and in your workshops, but also that I've been able to witness the two of you as a couple and as yoga teachers and now authors of the book Everything Matters, healing musicians, ethereal musicians, which I would call absolutely just an experience of sound healing that comes through in your music. And of course, just teachers of life. For me, the two of you really embody mindful living and connection and purpose in life of just being the gift that we each are. So I really want to thank you for being here and for allowing me to share the two of you with our listeners.
Wow. I mean, you have so touched us.
Oh.
And to think if we had any form of contribution or inspiration for you, it's so, we love that. It's why we do this.
Absolutely. Thank you for your beautiful words, and I'm kind of blown away by them. Really.
I'm very blown away. You've yeah. Hope to.
Well, thank you for receiving. Yeah, and thank you for receiving it. You know, I think that oftentimes maybe we don't share enough the appreciation and the gratitude that we do have, or as students, for our teachers. Yeah. So thank you for receiving that.
Well, if I may, I would just like to interject a thought for you. You know, we feel a resonance with you. We have since we first got to know you, and we've felt this connection. And as you've evolved and you created this podcast, you're doing incredible things through this medium. to be able to touch and change lives. So that's why we're so, first of all, honored and thrilled to have this opportunity to speak with you in this format.
Thank you. I'm receiving that. Thank you so much. I have the feeling my mouth is going to hurt from smiling so much at the end of this podcast.
Yeah, us too.
Yeah, it does. It feels really good just to be in this connected space and just to witness each other. And so, I'm just so grateful. And as a host of this podcast, one of the things that I do that the two of you know is I've created an interview form just to create the framework for the show. And as I was reading through your form, I shared with you, I felt like the words were coming out of my mouth. It just felt so good and so clear, and was such a beautiful reminder of how connected we truly are to everyone around us, and how we begin to create this smaller kind of interconnectedness as like-minded people in our community where we live, but that also this podcast is a way to do that and expand that energy out just a little bit further for those who, are here to listen to the message that you have to share today. So I'm so honored that we're here together. And a couple of the things that we really resonate on: sound healing for one. Musician, my husband's a musician. Your music locally, an event that the two of you host that is just beautiful, is your full moon yoga, which often includes live music. And then the crystal bowl chakra class was another one of my favorite classes. And I know that for me personally, sound is a way that I heal. I'm very sensitive to vibration and sound. And the other thing that we really resonate on is the sacred connection that we have in our partnership, in our marriage.
Yeah.
It's something that I've had the joy of witnessing the two of you together. I mean, the two of you together in class just seamlessly flow in and out of your teaching styles and your truths. And then you come back together, and it's just really beautiful to witness. And I just thank you for showing up in that space for other people to witness. It's such a sacred gift. And a very important part of my life, and of course health and well-being, is that sacred connection.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last thing that we really resonated with, that I want to get started on talking about today's topic, is that the two of you and myself came from pretty radically corporate driven lives. And we have both basically manifested our dream life. We've chosen to create what it is that we want to do and how we want to show up and serve unity consciousness, or serve the world through our work by the love of what we do. And it started out by being true to ourselves. So today you guys are full-time yoga and meditation teachers. You're musicians. You have your book that was recently published called Everything Matters. And you've really transformed your life and created a life where you travel and you share your message in other countries and in yoga studios around this country. You host retreats. You've been able to share your book with different people. And another thing that I really love is when you traveled recently to Europe, I said, "Are you going to share pictures?" And you said, "No, we're just in the being of enjoying the moment." So your life is, you've really created what you want, and not all of it we even see. And what I want to ask you is, was there a time in your previous life together when you were working corporate that really you decided, either individually or together, that your life was going to change?
Yeah.
Wow. Good question.
When you asked the question, I immediately jumped to a point in our lives that kind of shifted everything for us. And we were in the corporate world for 24 years. We were both climbing the corporate ladder and doing very well, successful monetarily, and had all the perks of having a wonderful corporate life.
By all the conventional metrics or measurements,
successful, if you will, by what some people call the standards.
Yeah.
And then we found yoga, and it didn't happen overnight with yoga, but I remember when we first signed up for our teacher training, it was Dennis that came to me. Believe it or not, it was him who said, I want to be a yoga teacher. And I was shocked. I was like, what? You're this corporate guy, vice president, blah, 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 traveling the world for business, and you want to become a yoga teacher? And he said, yes, I really want to do it. And I was like, okay, well, I'll be the supportive wife. And because
you should have heard family members when they heard Dennis wanted to be a yoga teacher.
Yeah. So we signed up for the teacher training, and I was going to go along with them. It was one of these intensive 27-day in a row kind of things. And so I was just going to be the supportive spouse to, deepen my own practice and let him learn to be a teacher.
Yeah. Could I interject a thought on that? What we learned earlier on when we first got together, and this goes back now 36 years ago, we've been married for 35 years, but all the way back in the beginning, we decided we didn't want to ever do anything separately. In other words, we don't have, men's vacations and weekends versus her vacations and weekends. And so we've kind of run this parallel path through all of these activities. So Kathy said, okay, you want to be this yoga teacher? I'll go along. I'll be there with you. I'll be there for you, but this is not my gig.
Yeah. So on day 3 of our immersion teacher training, our teacher came over to me, and she was one of these women who was very intuitive, very insightful, could see things, in your future that you had no idea were going to happen. And she looked at me and she said, Kathy, you're going to be a teacher. And I said, no, you don't understand. I'm just here for Dennis. He's the teacher. I'm just learning about my own practice. And she looked at me again and said, no, you're going to teach. You're going to co-teach together, and you're going to go on and do great things in yoga. And at that moment, I believed her. I believed every word she said. I started paying attention in the training because I figured now I have to be a teacher because we're going to co-teach and we're going to go on and do great things.
She even took notes.
So at that point, it was kind of like, okay, someone saw my future, told me what it's going to be like, and then we started making it happen. Mm-hmm. And so that was kind of the turning point of, okay, we're just going to be yoga teachers at some point down the road when we build up our business and become proficient at it and share the light mm-hmm. and the things that we've been taught. So that's kind of that turning point where we knew we were going to walk away from the corporate career and move into the field of yoga and meditation.
Wow. That's awesome. I was just like covered in goosebumps the whole time you were talking. Thank you for sharing that story. It takes a lot of courage to trust that choice.
Yes.
And my sense is that the reason it doesn't happen more often is because there are so many things that show up when we choose to completely just alter our life path. There's discomfort, I'm imagining self-doubt, and maybe other things that showed up. And so for our listeners, I'm wondering if you could share maybe the biggest obstacle you overcame, if there were any, and just share a little bit about like what that looked like.
Yeah, could I?
Yeah, go ahead.
To want to do anything requires that we need to see an interest or have an interest in it. And I think the reason why yoga and meditation became so interesting to me, why I had this idea I want to be a yoga teacher, is because at that time in my corporate life, in our life together, I was on a downward spiral. I weighed 45 pounds more than I do now. I was on blood pressure medication. I was on Singular because I was told I was pre-asthmatic. I was a wreck and successful, but I was a wreck and I was on my way to crash. This was not going to end nicely if I didn't do something. And I saw in yoga, that was a healing modality. And we've always thought of it as a healing modality ever since we first started to practice it. And I realized, wow, this is doing so much good for us, that was kind of the impetus, if you will, for us to want to share it with others. But the challenges along the way really faced us right up front. Within the context of yoga, you run into this interesting concept called satya, truthfulness. You run into this other concept called santosha, contentment. And I would say those are the two that combined together, which really I had to deal with, was what does it mean to be content? How much is enough? And we had never thought we ever had enough, but we had so much. It was really a paradox. And then to face contentment with truthfulness was really a big lesson for me in particular in my huge corporate ego. So I would say it took a while, right?
Yeah. And I think another obstacle that was unforeseen was when we both quit our corporate jobs on the same day. It was a 2-year decision. It wasn't like we woke up one morning pissed off and we went into work.
Yeah, we didn't just drink the Kool-Aid and like, whoa, man, we're gonna do this. Yeah.
So we were strategic about it. We planned it out and, made the smart choice about it. But then the day after we resigned and we woke up free to live our lives as yoga teachers and travel and do whatever we wanted to, I was all excited. I was like, yes, we have all day to do whatever we want. Poor Dennis, though, unforeseen to us, he almost went into a depression for a couple of months because he was no longer Dennis, vice president of this and that, and had the big title. And he kind of lost himself because he was caught up in that for so many years. And so he had to figure out who he was now and how he could be in this world, not being in the corporate world, and how he could, figure out who he really was.
Yeah, and it was an example of another key lesson we later learned. That was, in every moment we're alive, we're practicing something. And whatever you practice, you get better at. So I was practicing at being an egocentric, corporate-driven, acquisition-driven kind of guy. And I practiced that for a very long time and became very good at it. And I also think that there's a male component to the issue that I was facing. I think that men have a more difficult time letting go of their corporate identity, or we become too attached to our corporate identity. And so I think that was some of the hard work that I had to do on the mat, really, and through meditation. And by the way, it's not to say we're anti-corporate at all. We're thankful for what our corporate experience has done and led us to. And we do truly believe that people can be in the corporate world in a very mindful way. We chose to leave the corporate world so that we could choose to teach and share the benefits that we've experienced through, yoga and meditation.
Yeah, well, I hope you guys that are listening in are writing this stuff down. There are so many little nuggets of wisdom just coming out right now. I love it. Yes, I hear and I see that. And in the work that I do, I actually attract many of those women that are now in their 40s or 50s. They've been successful corporate women for 20 or 30 years, but they're unhealthy and unhappy and unfulfilled. Yeah. And so, like you, my choice and my place was also to step outside and come back and show these in particular women is the niche of who I work with, that there is a way of embracing your feminine empowerment in a new way, in the way of being and not just constantly doing, and coming back to the self-care, which is so important. One of the things that I love that you said, in my own words, what I would like to say is that abundance is our natural state of being. It's our perception, right? Like you have everything you need when you choose to see it that way.
Right.
And contentment What a wonderful gift. I think we could just do a podcast on that.
Oh, I agree. Totally.
I mean, contentment is like a golden word for me. It's like, especially coming from where we've come from. But we remember, just as you shared with me before we started recording, happiness, right? These are choices that we have: contentment, stepping into our truth, and happiness and joy. Like, these are choices we get to make.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm curious to know your thoughts on this, and I'd really like to get into sharing your message that you share through your book. But, when I started this journey years ago, and for me, mine came through parenting. For me, working corporate 70 hours a week actually led to a near-death experience with the birth of my first daughter. And so when I began this journey, it's been it's a journey, right? There was a belief at a certain amount of time, like that this stepping on this spiritual path or this connected path to the truth of who I was just so uncomfortable, and it was kind of painful. And then I realized that was just my perception about the experience. Like, we can choose joy, we can choose happiness. And really, when we get to the truth of who we are, we do live in alignment and flow. And so I think really just resonating on, that message and how you were able to transpire that into the work that you do is just such a powerful message, and showing up in a way that says, yeah, if you're still, we're totally not anti-corporate, but there is a way to live in the balance. There is a way to shift the perception, to look for the contentment, the gratitude, the joy, and to continue the self-care and the being, the mindful movement, the nutrition, things like that. So I want to ask you to share a little bit more, just dive a little bit deeper. So you made this shift, this choice to become teachers of yoga, teachers of yoga philosophy, which, by the way, for me personally, you are one of the greatest teachers for me as a reminder in what yoga is truly, really about. The philosophy of yoga. The reason, yeah, absolutely. The reason that I chose yoga, we know that our life reflection often can show up on the mat, and it's more than just a movement practice. It's a very sacred way of healing the body. And that you chose to be teachers of the yoga philosophy of meditation, mindful living, sound healing. And what is the greatest message that you wish to continue to share with the people through your yoga classes, through your meditation classes, through your music? What is the message that you would really like to have the listeners who are listening in today to really receive through your teachings?
Well, I think for us early on, the differentiator between a yoga class that was a real yoga class and a yoga class that was just calisthenics for us was the teacher incorporating what we like to call richness. So early on, when we took our teacher training, our teacher said, anyone can learn to call the postures. That's easy. You can take time, study, whatever, learn to call the postures. That's simple. But she said, what makes a real yoga teacher, what makes students come back again and again, is incorporating richness into your classes, talking about the deeper dimensions of yoga, the philosophies, other things besides the poses. And so that was what really resonated with me to differentiate us as a couple teaching yoga, which is unique anyway, that a husband and wife teach yoga together, but also to weave in some other things during the practice to get people thinking a little deeper, thinking about their lives, thinking about how they go about their lives, thinking about what's going on in their personal dealings with friends and family and all of that, to kind of get them thinking a little bit differently while they're in these shapes, while they're moving through the postures in the class. So that's something that we really focus on. Every class that we do, we've pre-planned in that way to bring a message in. Now, sometimes we show up on the mat and the message changes because someone needs to hear something that I haven't, set up to do or whatever. Dennis hasn't pre-planned, but most of the time we come in with a theme, with a message, with something to share with the class, and that way, other than just the shapes.
And the source of that information comes from the traditions of yoga and meditation. So it's not like we make it all up. We don't make it all up. It comes from that foundation because we study that a lot and we try to live it in our lives on a daily basis. So we realized that there's been somewhat of a dilution, if you will, of some of these concepts. And yet we have found through our studies that these very ancient principles that are so-called ancient apply very naturally in today's world. Because really, we're just human beings. We are human beings today, and they were human beings back then. But truthfully, the triggers of issues and stress and trauma and illness today, the only difference between us and them from before is technology, the pace of life, and these kinds of things. So we feel what we experienced for our own healing, we want to share that through our yoga classes and through meditation as a message, a conduit, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you absolutely do that every time you hold space. At least that's been my experience, is you guys are healers. And your love language is yoga. That's the space that you are holding for others to come in and receive that. It's like, mine is through food, mostly as a health coach, and yours is through yoga. And it's such a nice and gentle way to be able to do that, because a lot of times it's happening and maybe people don't even know it's happening.
Right.
We sneak it in.
Yeah, we try to sneak it in. Yeah.
Yeah.
If there's just a little crack with somebody or a couple of people, then it'll seep its way in, just as it seeped its way into us.
Yes.
Similar.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a gentle, delicate, beautiful way to be able to just, be in that space of healing, or being that conduit of light, really, that light energy, just kind of giving and receiving as a teacher in that moment. And as I've said, I've been on the receiving end of that as a student in your class. So, yeah, it's just it's an amazing experience. So I've always been so deeply grateful every time I've left your class.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the powerful messages that really comes through to me in your wisdom is sharing this message of where we are in today's time with what's happening in our lives. Like, we have this external world, and as we kind of talked before we started recording, this digital clutter. So there's digital clutter, there's expectations, there's roles and identities, which you shared, Dennis, was a struggle for you. It's a struggle for many people in many different ways. And how to, yes, we have this external environment and this experience this human experience that we're having, spiritual beings having a human experience. But then there's this choice that we get to make. This choice where we get to kind of step inward and see the truth of who we are as light energy, as divine energy. And then again, to kind of step out and be able to share that. And I'm wondering if you could just share in your own words for our listeners a way that you, maybe through a routine or through a practice, that has really grounded you in being able to live an example as a couple who fully embodies, because we all live in the same world.
Right.
We have these, we just make different choices, right? So what is a way that you could share maybe routines or practices or mantras, because I know you guys do mantras too, that have really worked to help keep you grounded in your practice? One of the quotes that you said is, life is a practice. We're constantly practicing each moment by moment. And the question is, what are you practicing? So would you be willing to share some of the things that the two of you work on together as that practice that are just a part of your sustainable way of living, mindful living?
So this idea of what are you practicing is something that we came across several years ago about, you're practicing something mentally every moment of your life. If you check in with the thoughts, you're like practicing something up there. And as we know, what you practice, you get better at. So if you check in throughout the day and just watch your thoughts and say, what am I practicing right now? Are my thoughts doing things like judging? Are they envy? Is it jealousy? Is it, all of these negative things? Am I practicing that? Do I want to get better at that? Or am I practicing compassion, love, sympathy, empathy, all of those things which we all want to get better at, right? So I've been challenging myself to just check in with the thoughts during the day, whatever it is, whether you're at the grocery store or doing laundry or picking up the kids or whatever it is, you just check in with your mental thoughts and go, okay, what's going on up there right now? And what am I practicing, right? And so when I thought about this concept, it kind of like shook my world a little bit. I'm like, oh my gosh, I really have to pay attention to what's going on with the thoughts. Because sometimes the things I'm thinking, I don't want to get better at, like the judgment or the self-criticism or trying to be a perfectionist or all of these things that some of us have tendency to be drawn towards and spend way too much time doing. So that's one of my practices that I do, is just check in with the thoughts and see, what am I practicing? And is that what I want to get better at? And if the answer is no, at that moment, I try and shift my thoughts into one of the things that I do want to get better at. So that's what works for me.
Yeah, and I think another complement to that concept is this idea of control. And we all have those things in our lives that we like and those things that we don't like. And so we try to live our lives in a way that we control the environment. We try to control ourselves and control the things that are happening around us so that we get more of the things we like and less of the things we don't like. But of course, the world doesn't work that way. And so it creates a great deal of stress. And I think one of the things that helps me to come to a reality about my ability to control is actually I can only control very, very little. I can control my internal choices like you were talking about. And to realize how kind of ridiculous it is to think that each one of us human beings on this planet all want it our way. We all want it my way. But there's over 7.5 billion of us on the planet. All 7.5 billion of us are going to get it our way. So these kinds of little reminders we try to bring into ourselves and our thinking, but also we remind each other to come back to these very basic little simple things. Because I think that there is a tendency in this world to make life far too complicated. It really is very simple. It's very, very simple to be alive and to be happy in this world. It does not need to be complicated.
Yeah, that's another nugget of wisdom right there. It really is. I've seen and witnessed that as human beings, we have basic needs: to be loved, to be acknowledged, to be safe. And one of them is to be in control, which we know is an illusion. And one of the things that I've learned and am practicing is making the choice and then letting it go, like letting go of the attachment to the outcome, which for somebody who, I'm sure you can relate to this, Dennis, for somebody who lived in the false belief that control equaled safe, it's a very interesting place to be, to now understand the surrendering and the letting go of the attachment, and how many times I'm often pleasantly surprised by learning that my attachment to the outcome was so limiting. In other words, when I give up the control, the experience is way better than I even ever imagined. And it's such a wonderful gift to learn. This is such good stuff. I just love that we're sharing this. So we have a few more minutes. One of the things that I really want to spend time on the last few minutes talking about is your book. And something that you said before we got on this call is intention, attention, and right action are key ingredients to health, happiness, and well-being. These are the overall points that you elaborate in your book, how you came from being that overachieving corporate hardworking couple who found your real truth, and sharing the message that other people can do that too, that it is more simple than we think. Because I do think from my own experience that as a listener, there may be some listeners on here that are thinking, well, you could just do this, but I can't. Or it's, I don't have a supportive spouse, or I don't have the financial means to just walk away from my job, or I'm not supported, I'm not safe, I'm not loved. Those false beliefs start to come in when we think about whatever choice it is that we want to make. So my question to you is, for the listeners out there, what, I guess, advice or wisdom could you share on, we know about your experience, but about living with that intention and creating, I think the key word here is the right action. I like to call it the inspired action to keep creating the life that we want. I think part of it is knowing that we're worthy of it. I know, at least on my journey, that's been showing up, knowing our self-worth, but then also there's also kind of in the spiritual community, in the yoga community, sometimes we can get caught up into just like being a little too much led by our heart and just giving it up and just trusting that it will all happen the way it's supposed to. But we do have that balance of taking those right action steps, right?
Yes.
So what advice do you have in living in that balance for those listeners here, as I imagine most of us are living in living in the world that we live in that balance to creating the life that we want through those inspired action steps?
Yeah, thanks. I guess it all kind of created the motivation to even write a book, because there were several key points that came together when we looked at how did yoga work on us and how do we use it on a daily basis to kind of navigate this world, but in a positive way. One of the things that we realized, and I'm an engineer by degree, so I'm very techie and somewhat of a nerd, they say. And so I realized that literally everything is energy. And so positive and negative thoughts, positive and negative emotions and feelings and so forth are all energy. And energy radiates. There's this ripple effect. So how can we live our lives if there's a ripple effect of energy? How can we live our lives in a way that can not only be present, like in the present moment, but how can we live our lives in a way that will uplift the moment, create a positive energy that will radiate outward and have a positive impact on the world around us? So this kind of becomes a framework that we took into the way we live to create, bringing the right intention sets up the right energy, placing attention, having the right attention and focus on that action then will result in the right impact on the world around us. And because of the reflective positiveness, that will also come back to us. In other words, law of attraction. So there are these things that together have come together in a way that allow us to be able to kind of integrate those basic concepts. And it kind of all manifested in this book because we realized that everything matters. And that's where we came up with the title. It sounded kind of corny, but it came from a meditation that we were having, a very deep meditation that realized in the present moment, energy and everything matters. So every single thought, feeling, emotion, intention, attention, whatever matters. And it will have an effect on the world around you, positively or negatively. That's up to you.
And if I might add on to something, as we were writing the book and getting with our editor, we were, as most people who write a book are, like, do we really want to write this book? I mean, who's going to buy it? Is there really anything to say? And does the world need, another book on yoga? And our editor was so lovely about it. She said, I truly believe the world needs more books on yoga and people who transform their lives. And the way you say it is completely different than the way someone else might tell their story. And so if you can get your book out there and maybe just touch one or two or a handful of people to help them shift their lives and live the life that they really want to live, then it's worth the effort and the expense and, the time that you took to write the book. So when she said that, I was like, okay, I get it. It is worth going through the journey of writing a book. And so we've been really happy with it. I'll show it to you here if you're able to see the video. It's called Everything Matters. And there's a long subtitle, How a Corporate Overachieving Couple Found Real Truth and How You Can Too. And It's Not What You Think. So it is available on Amazon. It's on Kindle and soon coming out in audiobook version as well.
One of the things that you brought up, though, that we go into is yoga, or I should say a chapter on couples and partners. And so we kind of share some of those thoughts as well, because we've realized that, to be together for 36 years as we have been, and it's such an integral part of what we do everything together, especially now that we're out of the corporate world, that there are some key points along the way that we learned about that might be beneficial for couples and partners. So, we wanted to mention that as well. It's not just a book on yoga, if you will. It's a book on, some key things that formed us and held us and create this energy that we now have.
Yeah, and here we are together.
Yes.
It's that you guys are together, like the experiences with the two of you, and I think that's a very much needed message in our world today, and comes very clearly from the two of you. And, I really resonate. I got super excited. Like we could do a whole nother podcast on the whole everything is energy.
Yes, we could.
I just, and I will be hosting some episodes with energy healers. I'm a former engineer myself. So for me, it really helped. That's like the tangible part of like the healing, right? Albert Einstein said everything is energy too, right? He was a smart guy. And that again takes trust and courage, that just something that we see either way we don't even know it. But so much of the world we live in now is, for many of us, is kind of instantaneous and tangible, and kind of have to remember to take a step back and look at the bigger integrated picture, the integrated network of life that we're all just a part of, intricately woven into.
True.
Yeah. Well, I am just so honored to share this time with you.
Oh, we're the honored ones.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for inviting us to be part of your podcast.
Of course. The two of you are just such lovely people inside and out. Teachers. The word that really comes to me is that you fully embody the word teacher in whatever way that really shows up. Because for me, it shows up in different ways. Like, as I said, as a couple, as yoga teachers, in the yoga philosophy, as healers, living consciously and mindfully, even in your choices and the way that you eat and move and connect with other people, because all of those connection and nourishment and movement and mindfulness, connection to source energy, living as our highest self, which we didn't actually get to, but you did write it on your paper. Those are all things that we both resonate with, that are available to everyone.
Yes. Yeah.
And when we take those right actions towards living in a way that serves our highest intention, we start to peel the layers and discover the truth of who we are.
Right. Yes.
As light beings, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As energy workers and
Yes.
healers,
Yeah,
beings of
absolutely.
light that we all are. Everyone's a healer, they just don't know it yet.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So for the listeners today, would you be willing to share how listeners can find you on social media and find out more about what you do on your website or Instagram, things like that?
We're really easy to find because our website is really simple. Yoga with DennisandKathy.com. And then everything else, the Facebook, other social media, it's always Dennis and Kathy Lang. So / Dennis and Kathy Lang on SoundCloud or Facebook, Instagram, we're easily found.
And we lead teacher training modules around the U.S. We lead retreats here in the U.S. and overseas. We're teachers at festivals, and we just recently got invited to teach at the Epic Yoga Festival in Marrakesh, Morocco in June. So we're really excited about that. And so you can find our schedule and everything that we do on our website, Yoga with Dennis and Kathy.
Yoga with DennisandKathy.com.
Wonderful. And that's Kathy with a K.
Kathy with a K.
Yeah. Awesome.
Spelled out.
Yeah. So for any of you listeners that are listening in, maybe you'll find yourself in an area around the country, or maybe you're excited to travel to another country to catch one of their retreats or yoga teacher trainings. And their music on SoundCloud is just, my experience is that it takes me to another place. So if you haven't listened in on SoundCloud, you can find them there. And so on SoundCloud, you're also Dennis and Kathy, or is it just Dennis? Okay.
Dennis and Kathy Lang. And then also we're providers for the Insight Timer global meditation app as well.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah. So if you use Insight Timer, you can just go in there and search under guided meditations, Dennis and Kathy Lang. And we have quite a few meditations and just music and some with words.
Yeah,
Insight Timer.
It's been over 4 years that we've been providers for Insight Timer. So
awesome. All right. So tons of ways to get in touch with you or experience your gifts, even if it's not in physical form. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Absolutely. To all the listeners. Oh, thank you so much. And namaste to the two of you.
Namaste. Thank you.
Thank you. Aloha.